Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Equity Alliance Equity Series. My name is Wafal Khalifa, and I work for Destination Medical Center as the Equitable Development Coordinator. I'm here with my colleague and the Equity Alliance partner, Chow Matala, and Chow serves City of Rochester as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director. This is our first episode for the year, and we did switch the equity series from the fourth Wednesday to the second Wednesday of every month from noon to 1. And in case you missed our previous episodes, feel free to go to the Destination Medical Center YouTube channel, and you'll find all the episodes that we had in 2023. And if you have any more or if you're looking to get any more information about the Equity Alliance, feel free to contact me or my colleague Chow Mitala, and we'll be more than happy to connect with you and your organization to share with you more information about the Equity Alliance and how you can join this initiative. And for today's episode, the title for today's episode is Advancing Equity in the Built Environment, but it's not only the built environment. It should give all of you some ideas on how you can advance equity in your procurement goals. And if you don't have goals in your organization right now, in today's episode, we'll be sharing what are some of the goals that City of Rochester and Destination Medical Center have established so far in order to increase equity in a built environment. And I am very happy to have our two colleagues and partners who will be presenting to you the two topics that we have today. I would like to begin by welcoming Lauren Jensen. Lauren serves City of Rochester as the Sustainability Coordinator. Welcome, Lauren. And I also would like to welcome Julie Brock, and Julie works as the program manager for Equity in the Built Environment program. Welcome, Julie. Thank you both for being here, and I'll stop sharing and I'll turn it to you, Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you, Wafa, and thank you for having us here today. Excited to share with everyone a little bit more about some of the City and DMC's targeted business contracting, prevailing wage, and workforce participation goals here. So just to get us started, I wanted to kind of go over why the city or others might be interested in adopting policies or goals that support more diverse participation in the workforce. The main reason is to reduce barriers to involvement. A lot of these barriers were created by historically excluding diverse companies from the marketplace, which have made it harder for them to compete in today's environment. Some of those barriers can look like accessing capital to acquire assets or manage cash flow in projects, or potentially other costs that are associated with starting and growing a business, ability to obtain bonding at early stages, prevent startups from bidding on some of these larger public infrastructure projects, and puts them in direct competition with prime contractors or larger contractors that have been doing this longer. And really just the learning curve of how to run a business and bid on projects and just participate in these processes are some of the barriers that can be experienced. But by setting policies and adopting these goals, there really is a lot that these can do to benefit our local economy and these participants in the workforce. So not only does it decrease turnover and improve performance of employees, it increases the work that's completed locally by our own local contractors and local employees. That in turn can boost state and local tax revenues. It allows us to retain more jobs and income and spending locally to our area where that work is being completed. It reduces economic and racial inequalities, particularly income and pay gaps that different types of workers might experience on these job sites. So back in 2013, when the Destination Medical Center legislation was passed, is kind of where some of this began, with the influx of public dollars and infrastructure projects that would be happening in our community. In 2015, the city adopted a targeted business enterprise utilization plan to match some of the state requirements that were included with the Destination Medical Center statute. In 2017 to 2019, we started contracted management for targeted business, prevailing wage, and workforce participation on DMC funded projects within the city. In 2019, the city hired a project manager to focus on compliance for these different goals with both city and DMC funded city projects. And in June 2020, our city council approved increases to those adopted goals. So we increased heavy civil construction to 4%, meeting targeted business, and commercial construction up to 7%. Just a few months later, we adopted a phased in approach for those capital improvement plans as well. So kind of looking at projects now in 2021, any projects that were valued at $5 million or greater were required to meet those adopted targets and goals. In 2022, it dropped down to any projects $3 million and greater. This past year in 2023, it was any city and DMC funded projects valued at $1 million or greater. So reducing that threshold each year to continue to boost the amount of projects that are required to meet these goals as we're able to build capacity and participants learn how those processes and how to meet those goals. Looking to 2024, we are proposing any projects at 500,000 and plus, as with that phased in approach. And in 2025 would potentially be looking at projects 175,000 and plus. So I just want to point out too the little graph that's on this page here that shows as the threshold value decreases for the projects that are required and their funding amounts, we are increasing the number of projects therefore that are including the targeted business, prevailing wage, and workforce participation goals. We'll kind of go over that in a little bit later of a slide, but again, we are seeing significant increase in the amount of projects impacted by that by phasing in the total construction amount for those projects. The reason the city and DMC wanted to adopt a targeted business and workforce participation plan was to meet three objectives, and that was to provide businesses owned by minority women and veterans and disabled persons an opportunity to participate in these public infrastructure, construction, and contracting projects, promote the increased participation of the workforce employment opportunities within those projects, and really to just provide procedures that would enable the city and the destination medical center to meet the requirements. So while we've adopted goals locally, the state has adopted goals, the federal government has adopted goals. This isn't new per se, but something that the city and DMC are taking on to continue to set that example locally and help build out capacity in the space outside our own entities and organizations. So moving forward, the specific goals that have been adopted and set first under targeted business is, again, 4% of the contracts need to go to targeted businesses and heavy civil construction. 7% of those in commercial construction need to go to targeted business. There are, certain stipulations within that in terms of when the bid dates are due, and good faith efforts that need to be provided to show steps that were taken to achieve targeted business goals if some of those goals couldn't be met within a particular project. Workforce participation goals align with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. So for people of color, it's 15% of workforce participation. For women, it's 9% this year. Again, those plans are due within 10 days after the bid and need to show the total number of hours completed by each of those subgroups within the plan. And then the prime contractor needs to provide certain recruitment training and retention strategies in order to continue to uphold those workforce participation goals, as well as estimates for what they perceive to be involved within that project. There is prevailing wage rules that were identified in the Davis-Bacon Act and related acts and regulation. These are outlined and it's linked in this slide here, which these slides will be sent out afterwards, but just updates the rules for administration and enforcement of these standards within construction projects. So it outlines prevailing wage, fringe benefits, wage determination, and record keeping, provides some kind of definitions for different words that would be used within this process, and just kind of outlines that for contractors. We also have equal pay and workforce certificates. This is specific to any political subdivision using general obligation bond funds. There's only one project for the city that has that particular bond funding going into 2024, so this one isn't as common, but just including it here as well, that contracts exceeding 250K would also need to meet certain goals underneath that general obligation bond. What I really want to cover today is the impact of these adopted goals. So what has happened as a result of making a commitment to these goals and investing in different opportunities that help expand these throughout the community. So all projects from 2019 to 2023 were totaled 7.6% in contracts for targeted businesses. So that exceeds the current goal of 7% over the average of those years. And that equated to $8.5 million in funding that went to targeted businesses in our community. In current active public projects, it's around 8% right now. So again, exceeding that current goal of 7%, and that is over $4 million of dollars that's going to targeted businesses. Active private projects is 15.3%, so almost double the amount of that goal. So you can see, as we've continued to increase the number of projects, we're increasing the number of public dollars that are going back to these targeted businesses, and really diversifying our local economy for these groups and building equitable wealth across these organizations and entities that are participating in these projects. So 8 projects in 2021, and we're expecting over 40 projects this year in 2024 that will be impacted by these goals, and specifically targeting women, minority, veteran, and disabled owned companies. Just a few examples of some specific projects the last couple of years, again, to continue to show the impact that these goals are having on our local economy. In 2022, again, we were looking at any projects that were $3 million or greater. We had a few here that were city specific. So a duct bank project that was 10.8 million, and $530,000 of that went to targeted business contracts. Some others, our Cascade Lake Park was 4.3 million, that had 95,000 that went to targeted business contracts. This past year in 2023, again, some projects with some significant percentage of the project costs that were dedicated and went to targeted business contracts. So not only are we showing increase in the project costs and increase in the amount of funding that's supporting targeted businesses, but increased targeted businesses that are able to participate in these processes and are representing a larger percentage of those project costs. Also, we just want to highlight the 2022 Construct Stormwater Regional. 100% of that project cost went to a targeted business, and that was Nadeau Companies, and they were the first targeted business to win an award as a prime contractor. So really exciting and great to see that progress happening here in the community because of these goals and commitment to supporting these companies in this space. To kind of start to wrap up a little bit here, looking at supporting the broader adoption of these goals outside of projects that maybe the city or DMC has a specific hand on. Targeted business, workforce participation, and prevailing wage goals are seen locally because of the commitment, but these are statewide goals that were adopted earlier on. We're seeing federal goals adopt these as well, particularly with the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act and the IRA acts that were passed. A lot of these dollars are wanting to align with both sustainability and equity components in the procurement of these projects. But it doesn't have to just be goals that support construction or infrastructure. It can be procurement of products or any services in general. If where are your office supplies coming from that you're purchasing, and what types of businesses are those supporting? So as an organization or an entity, some things that you can do if this is something you want to start looking at and setting goals for yourself. You can start by connecting with organizations like the city or DMC, or even the state of Minnesota has a ton of resources. Folks who have already adopted goals to learn more about what that process looks like, how to be involved, how that goal setting works, and what are the different types of certifications that are involved in it. as your own entity, start collecting information on how your dollars are being spent and who's being connected. You know, if you do requests for proposals and those go out, who are those reaching and who's responding to those? If you internally are more in purchasing supplies and services, what kind of businesses are you supporting with those purchases? Is there a certain percentage that's going towards women and minority owned businesses? What does that look like so that you can create a baseline to track and measure progress on goals? And then really once you have that baseline information, setting up a structure and goals for your organization based on your own spending. And again, this is really supports our economy. You know, community building requires investment in communities that we have historically excluded from these. And so setting these goals and intentionally engaging with these groups, this wouldn't just automatically happen. So goal setting is an intentional way to ensure that we're aware of where our dollars are being spent and who they're impacting and how that impacts our local economy and community members. And then finally, outside of just goal setting, other ways that the city and DMC and other entities, you know, could mirror in terms of investing in the capacity building of this space. So we've completed a follow-up disadvantaged business enterprise barrier study to really understand some of those barriers that disadvantaged businesses are experiencing as they try to participate in this process, hosting expos to allow networking, and again, to just provide resources for folks looking to enter these processes. A lot of collaborations, you know, statewide, regionally, with different entities that can support, you know, not only the processes, but the workers and the employees and the institutions in these spaces as well. And then participating in projects such as our Bloomberg Global's Mayor's Challenge to really highlight and continue to put emphasis and investment in the opportunities that we have in our community here. And so with that, I will pass it over to Julie Brock, who is our program manager for the Equity and the Built Environment program that came out of that Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge. So thank you all for your time today, and I'll hand it over to Julie.
Thanks, Lauren. And while I'm getting my PowerPoint pulled up, honestly, if you have any questions, please throw those in the chat. You know, I think that there's some great conversation to have around targeted business goals in any organization and in any department. So just, you know, put your thinking caps on and let's go.
Thank you, Julie, for that reminder, because I forgot to mention that we encourage everyone to utilize the chat function. Please share your thoughts, questions, and we'll make sure that we read your questions at the end of Julie's presentation. I also see that Chow shared the question on or in the chat. Do other organizations in this call have specific goals for targeted businesses, women-owned, and people of color? And feel free to share your thoughts and where is your organization in this journey so far? Pass it back to you, Julie. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And hello, everyone. I'm just so excited. If you're not local, we have some snow on the ground for the first time, and I'm super excited about it. So I'm here, like Lauren said, I'm very excited to be able to do the program management for equity in the built environment. This is a joint program between the City of Rochester as well as Workforce Development Incorporated. We were one of 15 cities that won this award through the Bloomberg Philanthropies Global Mayor's Challenge. And I'll talk a little bit about how this is seeded money to continue our effort. Because oftentimes when we think about the goals that Lauren brought up, the subtext or the parenthetical that we might be thinking about in the back of our head is, but where is that workforce? So let's talk a little bit about that. So our agenda today, I'm going to talk a little bit about equity and built environment, but how it fits into the bigger picture of workforce development's work around bridges to built environment. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we are recruiting and trying to retain women of color into built environment industries. And I think that there's going to be transferable strategies for you when you start to think about your workforce and how you would like to encourage people with diverse backgrounds to come work for you and then to retain them into that. So you'll see our mission and vision there as workforce development. Really, most importantly, that I like to push out is that Workforce Development Incorporated is a champion for workers, and they are also a champion for employers. They work with both. They work with employees as well as employers, and you'll see that as I continue to talk through this program. So when we think about bridges to built environment, first and foremost, people will ask me, well, what's built environment? Why are we saying built environment instead of construction? And I'll just pose that back to you. When I say construction, what comes to mind for you? Go ahead and put it in the chat. When I say construction worker, what comes to mind to you? Go ahead and put it in the chat. I can't see the chat, so I'm going to make some assumptions. But Chow, you nod your head if my assumptions are correct. Okay. All right. So it's the same premise. When I came out of education, for those who don't know, I used to work in K-12 education. And when I would say that I was an English teacher, I would get one of two reactions. I would get somebody who would lean forward and say, oh my gosh, I loved English. Or I would get somebody who would lean back and suck their teeth and ask me if I was going to correct their grammar. I would do neither. Okay. So it's the same thing. So I started introducing myself as an educator because it introduces a pause. It introduces a pause for somebody to say, well, what does that mean when you say educator? What does that mean? It's the same thing when I say built environment. Now, when I say built environment, what comes to mind? Go ahead and put those things in the chat. Right? Built environment is everything from development, so pre-construction, architecture, landscape design, designing, CAD, all of that. We have pre-construction, we have construction, right? We're building, actively building things, and post-construction, finishing touches, the interior design, inspection. So when I say built environment, we're talking about the entirety of what it goes into in order to construct a building within our community. And that's what we're after. So when we start to think about bridges to built environment, that's what we're talking about, is all of those. And equity in built environment is one program of that bridges to built environment program that WDI has. And that program is primarily focused on women of color. So let's talk about that. Why is that important? This just tells you that we serve all of Southeast Minnesota because we know the building happens in Rochester. It also happens all over our state. And serve those who are within the 10 out of the 11 counties of Southeast Minnesota. So our program is really built about this. Bridges to Built Environment serves employers as well as career seekers. And you might be thinking, well, why would we need to serve employers? We have great benefits. We have great wages. Why aren't people just lined up wanting to work for us? Well, because it goes back to what that first stereotypical idea came to your head about what a construction worker looks like. So when we did our work in order to get ready for the Bloomberg Challenge, we did a process called co-design. And within that co-design, we had women of color working with industry professionals to start to think about why is it that women of color aren't coming into built environment industries? And one of the things that was identified by both industry professionals as well as women of color is that construction or built environment industries have been primarily white and primarily white male for many, many years. They've never really they've never had to necessarily change that. And they don't really know then, how do you become inclusive as a organization who really hasn't had to be? And I say that with like the kindness of heart, right? It's kind of like when people come to education and I throw all my acronyms around, right? I don't think that I'm being exclusionary, but I am. So it's just thinking about what is that jargon. So employers said, hey, guess what? We really want to do this, but we want to do this well, and we need help. So one of the ways that Bridges to Built Environment helps employers diversify and retain their diverse population of workers is through what we call the IWE designation, which stands for Inclusionary Workplace Employers. And I'll talk about that in a second. And the other thing that we do is we offer some hiring opportunities that are a little bit more intimate for our employers who are working with us in the equity and built environment work, as well as our career seekers. And the reason I say that is because we want our employers to be inclusive employers, to hire out of our training programs. And women who are in our programs have asked for the ability to be hired in cohorts of women, maybe 2 to 3 versus just 1, and to be able to have mentorship as they are onboarded and brought into the company. So both of these are what we supply or provide through our program for employees and employers. So getting back to why we did this in the first place. Currently in Rochester, we have less than 1% of jobs in construction, so on the work sites, filled by BIPOC women, though they make up 13% of our population. Now, when we expand those numbers to include all of built environment and across Southeast Minnesota, because we had to actually get up to that data set to get enough viable numbers, less than 2% of built environment industries across Southeast Minnesota are held by a woman of color. So there's great opportunities we know within built environment that honestly, we're still puzzled as to why we don't have more women of color within these. And so that's what really was the driving question for equity in built environment. And so our co-designers came together and they created 4 different work streams. I'll talk about them very briefly. One is K-12 career exploration. One of the things that we learned is that not many women are encouraged to continue in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, curriculum past, you're going to love this, past 4th and 5th grade. So we know that we need to make sure that we are in the classroom encouraging women that there's all sorts of great opportunities for them within built environment industries. The second work stream is around training and mentorship. This really comes down to technical skills. Obviously, women want to have technical skills and they're precise and they are professionals and they love what they do. And they also would like to have mentorship so that they understand the why as to what is happening on a work site or in the pre-construction side. So bringing mentorship to unpack some of those unwritten rules that we know exist in all of our industries. Just intentional onboarding with mentorship and potentially hired in cohorts is really what that training and mentorship is around. And the third one is around employer readiness. And I really highlight this is because this is the differentiator between our program and maybe other programs across the nation, is that we are not putting all of the onus of this partnership on women. We're putting this onus on the employer as well. It is a partnership. And how will you as an employer ready your organization for the diversity and the needs of primarily in this program, women of color? And then the fourth one is that we know that we already have powerhouse women of color in industry who maybe are looking for the opportunity to start their own company. And so we have entrepreneurship that will support them as they start to launch their own company so you can hire them as a targeted business. And all of our program is within a continuous improvement cycle. This is new. It's new to our employers. It's new to our employees. So we can constantly assess, train, hire, mentor, get into that team, assess again, how is it going, and then make adjustments from there. So the biggest thing for the career seeker is really this idea of the intentional onboarding. Like I said, we ask our employers who hire out of our programs, hire in cohorts of 2 to 3, have a technically skilled mentor, preferably BIPOC women. We totally understand that we're working with low numbers right now, but we're hoping that this will increase that. And they have a 5-week mentorship experience. So essentially, that doesn't mean that they have somebody hooked to their side the entire time. It just means that they have somebody designated on site or within the company that they can go to and ask questions of what's happening within their work. It's 5 weeks because we think that after 5 weeks, you get a pretty accustomed to what's happening within that workplace. It doesn't mean that the mentor goes away after 5 weeks. It's just that we're hoping for gradual release of that mentorship so that the woman is ready and feels really confident to do whatever job that she's been hired to do. And like we said, we hire into IWE designated companies, and I'll talk about that for you as well. And then the existing crew or the existing office that also is hosting our new hires of women of color, they too have a mentor. And this mentor is really around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging training. How are we making sure, again, that we're working together to intentionally onboard our new employees to all of the different unspoken hidden rule books that we might have within our organizations? And I think if you really think about it, you all know it. And you can think of one right now, right? One of the hidden rules within your organization. So for employers, like I said, Workforce Development Incorporated they are they're the work board for our region, and they work with the other regional workforce boards, and together they have created an IWE designation. This is no cost to the employer to go through the designation. However, there's some requirements within the designation that might come with cost. So when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, really we're thinking about inclusion. Diversifying is one thing. Equitable hiring practices, equitable policies is another. Inclusion is really around that idea of do I feel like I belong when I show up to work? And those are the places that we're really focused on when we come into the IWE program. There are resources available. So if a company is looking within built environment to hire women of color, there are some resources available to you for the IWE designation. The IWE designation asks for some assessment, some training, and some continuous improvement. So we can actually help companies with their assessment and training costs up to $6,000. We do offer a mentorship training for those employees that you have identified that will be the mentors for hiring new employees. And then we also offer consultation. We have companies right now that are involved who will call and say, hey, can you help me with this policy? This is happening. I'm not sure how to handle it. And so we also have that consultation and support for employers. And then also they have access to vetted inclusion consultants. In fact, we have 6 who have been identified to work specifically with our employers within the IWE designation. You can always go and find another one as well, but you have access to those that we've already vetted who know about this program, and they are ready and willing to help. So why now? Well, you've heard Lauren talk about the success of the targeted workforce goals for both city and state projects. We're actually hoping that across the community, our owners of projects would adopt these workforce goals, because you can see the power of that when we have one project that 100% went to a targeted business. That's the power of these goals. These goals, oftentimes I think people think of them as compliance goals, but really they're a continuous improvement. And that's what we really want to see, is that we want to see those numbers continuously improve over time, because what that tells us is that companies are retaining and they are promoting. And more importantly, hopefully women are starting their own businesses to really diversify that talent pool that we want to see both in business ownership and as well as workforce. Let's be real, the talent pools are low, and we are facing a big another peak of retirement out of the built environment industries. Right now, as of November 2023, our unemployment rate in Olmsted County was 1.4%. So what does that mean? It means that maybe we have some folks who are not involved at all in the workforce because they haven't found the right opportunity. And it also means that we might have some folks who are underemployed. Maybe they're working 2 to 3 jobs versus 1. So there's a real opportunity to make meaningful connections and meaningful relationships with women of color and other diverse populations to really start to think about this as a business strategy. The businesses who figure this out are the businesses that will continue to grow and succeed in our future. Because I just can't leave this conversation without reminding you that we are on track to be 60% of people identifying as people of color for our region by 2035. And that's according to our state demographer. So to not do this, bad business. Okay, in summary, this is our equitable response to the needs of women. It is centered on the needs of women, period. Okay, so I just want to put that out there. We are blatant and we're proud of that fact. It is what differs, like that's what makes us different. It's about the partnership between women of color and industry partners. How are we partnering and creating a workplace that is productive and exciting and inclusive? This is a successful business strategy for both attraction and retention. Having the IWE designation is actually what we are promoting to women in our programs to say, look for those companies who have that designation, because they may not have it right? They may not have it perfect. We're not about perfect, but they have a commitment and they are committed to doing better and being better. And that is a place where your voice is going to be heard. And that's a place where your voice is going to matter. And like I said, there's resources, both financial and consultative, that are available to you and your company. That you might be saying, Julie, that sounds great, but I'm not built environment. That's okay. Reach out to me anyway. There's been so many great lessons that we've learned in this space that are totally transferable to any business, to any department. And I'm happy to have that conversation with you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop so we can have the real conversation, which is the discussion with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. That was great. Thank you, Lauren. I encourage everyone to utilize the chat again and to share with us your questions and thoughts. Um, and while I'm waiting for those questions to come in, um, Lauren, your presentation and Julie reminded me of the first episode that we shared on the equity series that when we launched it, which is the community wealth building. I've read not too long ago that the minority owned businesses and women owned businesses, whether in built environment, whether they're not in a built environment, the needle did not move much in terms of um, the opportunities that they are getting access to. And if we are looking into building wealth equitably in our community and ending those disparities, housing disparities that we all know about, um, our state has one of the largest housing disparities. How can we, as a community, move the needle in creating opportunities for disadvantaged businesses, minority owned businesses, women owned businesses, without all of us committing into the process? So I encourage everyone to watch the first episode, which is titled Community Wealth Building. Um, it it shows kind of an overall view of how your organization can become an anchor organization. And then from that first episode, we have taken different um, topics all the way to today's topic on some of the examples the city of Rochester and DMC have committed to in order to create targets. I do see a question from Al. Are you encouraging construction organizations to set their own target goals?
I can maybe start, and then Julie, if you have anything to add. I think the reason we've set goals and adopted goals is to really be a leader and set an example for other organizations, to kind of show that it can be done and how it can be done, as well as progress that can be made in this space. And so very much encouraging those organizations to do that as well. And I think that kind of segues into Julie and some of the work with her programming with the IWE designation, and maybe she can touch on that a little bit more. But having them take that look more internally into where are the areas that they can improve on, or maybe make some changes with how their own operations.
Yeah, I think that thank you, Lauren, for that. And Al, to your point, yes, of course, I think that we're encouraging all owners of any sort of construction build, as well as construction companies, adopt goals. And the reason is that, but it's a fine line, right? We straddle that line of that very easily going into compliance, where we hire somebody and maybe we don't train them, or we put them on menial work so that we have the body versus the professional. So I think it's very important when we start to think about having these goals going forward, is that this isn't about compliance. It may feel like it, but really this is about transformational change. And this is about creating an atmosphere in which people are encouraged to do good and great work. And we also know that our brain patterns, sorry, I'm going to get geeky on you. When we have our brain patterns go down and we learn information a certain way, and now we're being asked to learn a new brain pattern, it takes time for you to get up and out of that rut of that brain pattern that says compliance, 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 into inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. And that's what we're asking our brains to do, both as a construction company, an owner of any sort of construction work, as well as any organization that has some sort of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging focus, is commit to that, and then commit to moving out of compliance into inclusion. Because really, don't we all want to show up and be our best selves and do authentically great work and not be minimalized for that?
Absolutely.
Then,
Go ahead, Chao.
Julie, there is a follow-up question here for you. Jennifer Spindler-Craig asked, Julie, would you be willing to briefly repeat the demographic projections for our local community?
Yes. So the state demographer has said that we are on track. Actually, we're ahead of, I'll get into the nuance on that in a second. But by 2035, 60% of our population in Southeast Minnesota will identify as a person of color. If we look at Rochester Public Schools right now, 44% of our student body in Rochester's public schools identifies as a student of color. So we are actually on track to most likely hit that number earlier than 2035.
Great. I do see a question, I believe, from Kendra. Do you have perhaps two beliefs that you have had to bust on to help get people over hesitancy to set procurement-related goals? It's really hard to get people to set goals. I don't understand why.
I think part of that, again, comes back to this idea of compliance versus continuous improvement. We have, I think that we have a certain amount of perfectionism in our workplaces, right? So if we set a goal and we don't meet it, what is the punitive action that may come of that? And so I think it really is, again, getting out of compliance and into inclusion also asks us to get into continuous improvement. So the myth busting is, yeah, if I have a 1.4 unemployment rate, and the majority of the targeted folks that I'm, that I would like to connect with are in at underemployed places, that's going to be really hard for me to go like from every single business to say, hey, are you underemployed? What, we have opportunities for you, right? So the first is recognizing that the data is a little bit against us, but that doesn't mean that you don't set the goal, right? All it means is that work toward that goal may take a little bit longer, right? But that doesn't mean that you don't set the goal.
And if I could add to that as well, if that's okay, this is Chow from City of Rochester. I would say the other myth to bust in this one is the idea that people think that the marketplace is already equitable. And I think a lot of times the reason people think that is because we don't often collect data already on who is participating in the marketplace for our specific organizations. So sometimes when we collect that information, it can surprise us when we realize that we have one group that is dominating our marketplace for a specific organization. So in collecting that data, I think it can be really revealing, and you can bust the myth of, the marketplace is already accessible and equitable to every community? And what are things that you need to do then to ask the appropriate questions based on the data that you collect to say, well, we don't see this particular demographic or group participating. Why is that the case? And are there things that we can do within our own organization to allow that access? And I do see some hands up. I'm not sure whose hand went up first between Kendra
I
and
believe
John.
Kendra was first, and then we'll go to John.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I guess what I find is, Julie, I understand what you're saying about compliance, but in terms of, an organization, I'm just going to say generally, not my organization, but generally an organization is buying things, right? Procurement. They think they have good vendors. They like their suppliers. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like I actually find that being more the mentality, and maybe the belief that, okay, but we're not, what I know of my community in Rochester is maybe a lot of the restaurants are diverse, or we have X businesses that are diverse, but I don't think that what I'm buying, I don't think there's any diverse vendors out there. I mean, I'm finding that to be more the reason that they're hesitant to set goals. But I'm just curious about anybody else and what they're finding they have to bust in terms of myths.
I would just, to touch on that a little bit, internally for sustainability, we started doing this and looking at our procurement and kind of what percentage of our spend was spent on, green or sustainable products, what percentage was spent on diverse entities offering particular projects. And so I do think this might not answer so much of the myth busting, but it does require a little bit of a commitment and some time to sit down, and that's kind of what I outlined in one of my later slides of, as an organization or entity, understanding where you're sitting and where you're at to know where you can go before you even start looking at goals. And so that does just take, maybe someone sitting down and analyzing that spending and what it looks like. I don't know if that really helps with the myth busting question or piece of it, but just spending that time to understand where you're at currently, and where you could go from there with the goals. And that does just take a little effort.
If I could just add a quick reflection, Kendra, I recommend for you to watch the first episode of the Community Wealth Building. One of the things that we've learned from Democracy Collaborative, which was the organization that presented in the first episode, is assessing the current vendors as an organization and what you have. There is also, I believe, a different type of assessment that can be done, which is a leakage assessment, identifying where this money and where these vendors are. So if your organization is absolutely committed into um, investing in the community and building wealth in the community, let's assume the organization spends $10 million on papers. It would be shared with the community that we do spend $10 million in paper with this organization that's located out of a different state. That would open the opportunity for local organizations to think about starting a small business that does or offer paper. And then the organization, the anchor organization, would designate a specific amount out of their annual, purchasing for paper to go to this local organization that they have in order to build local wealth. The example that was shared, there were several examples in that episode, and one of the examples was shared was from Cleveland Clinic, how they invested in their local community in order to open a laundry facility. They were doing laundry in an outside facility, but how they opened the opportunity for a local organization to do so. So I recommend for you to look into that episode, and we can talk offline more about it. Let's go to John. Sorry for the wait. Go ahead.
Not at all. I applaud your efforts, and for those that were able to, or perhaps it's going to be online, the mayor's State of the City address was earlier today, and it was incredibly well done, and probably speaks generally to many of the themes we're talking about. But I'm just curious, you know, I think maybe we need to do a better job, Julie, of sharing information. We serve over half of the people that are looking to start businesses here that we see come through the SBDC, or maybe Collider as well, and others are BIPOC. And and we're very proud of that. And we've backed that up with the Economic Development Fund that has funded over 50% in minority-owned businesses. One of the things I'm curious about, though, as I know that is happening, and we have an organization built around enhancing that performance, is how many people, I talk to a lot of people, and not dissimilar to those that are on this Zoom mosaic. And not all of them want their daughters to go into construction or the built environment. And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I just really wonder, when I talk to people about where their daughters might be, what careers they're interested, some have said that the built environment, some have even asked why we are putting them in the built environment versus other careers in other areas. So I think also that certainly the construction industry is very open to all employees. I'd like to think they are, and they need them badly, and we're going to need a lot more of them. But I am curious too, you know, how we support those that are delivering those entrepreneurial services to the audience that we like to talk a lot about, and how much resource is really going into that actual work. And I think there could be a lot more. But also, how do we look at those other areas where, frankly, a lot of your daughters, sons, would prefer to be working in, actually, than the built environment?
So John, just for clarity, so you're asking, I'm still confused. Are you asking if we are forcing people into built environment organizations? Because we're certainly not.
No.
What are you asking?
No, I know that's not at all your intention. I've had
No,
people,
it's not actually what we're doing. So I'm just trying to figure out what is the
yeah, no,
question.
please don't. Yeah. Okay, let me reframe it. Do you happen to know what percentage of the population wants to work in the trades?
In the trades or in built environment?
Built
Because
environment.
those are two different things.
Agreed. Built environment. Do you know what
So-
that interest level is?
Yeah, so that's what we're doing, and we're gathering our data right now for the local. So when we talked with our co-designers, one of the things that our women said who were co-designing is that, especially for our folks who may be immigrants or new to our country, indicated that there is some home ideas about construction, particular, that they would not be happy, like that wouldn't necessarily be something that they would encourage their daughters or their sons, really their children, to go into. And so part of it is around this education. And so in our K-12 career exploration, which we did another co-design with young women of color, and young women of color told us that a lot of times it's about access, and it's also about parent education. So some of the things that we're talking about is really about upstream strategies to indicate that when we say construction, too often we only think about the building itself and being out on site. And when we think about built environment, we're talking about so many more other professions and careers that are available to women within that industry. And again, I want to go back to the fact that we have less than 2% in built environment industries, from development all the way through to inspection. So we're not just talking about work site. So I want to make that very, very clear that we're talking about all of built environment. And the other thing that we have found when we are working with our community organizations, and we're going out and we're partnering with community organizations, and we're following their lead, we're asking them, what is it that your community needs to know, and how do they want to get that information? And so it's really not about any one person within this program, and especially me as a program manager, I am a system builder, telling anyone that they have to, or they are like that, the insinuation is that we would ask somebody to go into something that is not within alignment of their strengths, within alignment of their interest or their community interest. More importantly, we're asking what the community needs to know about built environment, and then we're offering it as an opportunity. And I don't want to get away from the fact that, again, what differentiates this, because we put so much onus on women, is really the onus is on the companies within built environment industries, that if they want to be successful with the amount of building that we have coming, and they want more diversified populations to be within their workforce, that they really need to start looking at their policies and procedures and see what they're doing to be an inclusive environment, because that truly is the language of our young workers as well as our diverse population workers. Does that answer your question?
It was very interesting. No, it was very interesting. I appreciate the insight. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I believe there is one more question here in the chat. I know Lauren answered a question from Sadie, how can residents best support city efforts? But it also relates to a question that I received also earlier. How can an organization find minority-owned businesses or identify them? Where would we be able to access that information?
I would say the state has several lists that you can access of vetted folks within the space. There are resources on the city's website specific to the goals that we've adopted in this space as well. I will admit I am new to entering this role, so that is the extent of the resources that I know at this moment. And so if Chow or Wafar or anyone else has any other things they'd like to chime in with there, please feel free to add on to that.
And Lauren, if I could just ask, is the question more about how residents can support the city?
No, I tied them both to another question that I received, which is how can organizations find or minority-owned businesses? So if we do have an organization now that wants to commit into intentional contracting and creating opportunities with minority-owned businesses, where can they find a list of minority-owned businesses?
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So yes, one, you can connect with the city or DMC who already have worked with a number of DBEs or women and minority-owned businesses, but the state of Minnesota also has a directory of DBEs, so disadvantaged business enterprises, that you could look through. I know our partners, some of whom are on this call, I know Tawanda is on here, also has kind of a repository of a list of those kind of businesses, whether they're starting or established. And I will also add that the city is currently working on coming up with kind of like an asset map of all of our women and minority-owned businesses within the city of Rochester, and we'll share that broadly. So there are a couple of different avenues. And Wafa, I think one thing that I can do is, before you send this out, is put together a list of those resources that can go out with this PowerPoint so that people can know how to reach out to those. The second part of the question is how can residents support the city is, you know, the city and DMC are two entities, but there are lots of entities on this call who also have procurement, right? Who purchase things or who are building things within our city. Maybe asking some of those organizations about their goals, right? And saying, you know, is this something that you have considered as we're thinking about building a community equitably? And how can we be supportive of that? So I think that's another way that residents can be supportive.
Great. I do see a question from Eric, and I believe the question is what source of transportation mode shift benchmarking is occurring to ensure we reach a significantly more racially and financially equitable transportation ecosystem by 2035? If our two presenters don't have an answer to this question, we'll be more than happy to provide a follow-up question. So for others, if in case we missed your question, we'll be sending follow-ups and answers to your question. from ACLA, could we as a community help BIPOC intentionally to get the training as multilingual learners cohort needed to complete to attain their general construction certification? Maybe that question is more to Julie. And
Absolutely. That is something that we can certainly talk about. I think that's a fantastic approach, and I think it's a great strategy. And again, we would love to follow your lead and support you on what you think will work for your community.
great. I see some really awesome comments and feedback from Eric and from Sadie and from Kendra. So thank you so much for sharing all these thoughts, and we'll make sure that we share them with the presenters. But I think we want to be respectful of everyone's time. I want to thank Lauren Jensen from City of Rochester, the Sustainability Coordinator, for presenting today. And thank you, Julie Brock, the Program Manager for Equity in the Built Environment. Thank you so much both for being here with us. We'll be sharing the presentation materials and all the resources that we talked about in a follow-up email once the episode is available on YouTube. And we encourage everyone to go and visit the Destination Medical Center YouTube channel in order to see the other episodes. Our next episode is going to be February 14th. So Valentine's Day episode. I also want to remind everyone that Martin Luther King Day is this Monday. So please check in your community what celebrations and what events that they're happening regards Martin Luther King. And then also February is Black History Month. And we hope that you uh, take a look at the different events and connect with the different communities in order to not to share reflections, but to make tangible commitments in order to build wealth equitably in our community. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. See you next month.